And face reveal. Even though my face is easily available. I haven't been in a lot of face cam stuff lately, so everyone's like, oh my god, that's what it looks like. It's just crazy. Oh shit. Also, hey, it's in a video that makes it a tax write-off now, right? That's how this works. Tax code makes perfect sense, obviously. Taking the place of Stephanie today is going to be this lovely Dark Souls art I got for Christmas, which is nice to look at. So, I'm gonna level with you guys. I've been procrastinating, and I would like your help in helping me not procrastinate anymore. Because if I'm doing a video, maybe I can focus on getting this shit done. So a day or two, I guess it's probably like 2 days ago, we did session 0 because we're doing D&D. Normally I don't want to talk about things that I haven't, like, aren't surely definitely going to happen, because like involves planning in a group of people, and I'm like worried that like the whole thing might fall apart and nothing happens, and then it's like, oh, I'm sorry for getting your hopes up about the thing. But at this point I put money down on this, so like something better happen. I've already paid for the module and stuff like that, so worse things are going to happen than getting some audience members' hopes up. If the D&D series doesn't happen, that would suck. So I think we're ready to go. I think this is happening. We got a little squad together. And this is going to be a really weird video. It's me genuinely getting some work done on my D&D character while also introducing some of you guys to some ideas about D&D, and also I think I'm going to tell some stories to open things out more. So, you know, this intro part might be a little more fun, little story time, and then we get to the actual character building, which should hopefully help increase some understanding with some people, like what D&D is as a concept and so on, because like a lot of people, you know, like D&D is like the archetypical RPG, like that so much of everything is based around, and like we play video game RPGs here, but like what are the other RPGs, and like what is the root of all, thank you Loudcar, what is the root of all this? So I'm gonna sit here for probably a few hours and hang out. This will probably take the place of this week's Patreon video, sorry guys, but you know, it's part of the Christmas break thing, it's fine. And we're probably, I should say this early on in the video, we're probably gonna stream D&D, I think, this Saturday, somewhere in the ballpark of like 2 or 3 p.m. Pacific time, I think, for probably multiple hours starting at that point. That'll be like our first session. That also might function as a good learning session too, in addition to what we're doing here. The goal of this stuff isn't necessarily to be a tutorial outright. There are more effective tutorials, for example, ones that have a script and are carefully constructed and edited and well-paced and concise and stuff like that. But, you know, for those of you that are just kind of are around and watching my stuff, you might end up picking up stuff about D&D just by watching, like, this video and the next video. And then if you don't care about that stuff, there's just going to be a whole series coming. But I do find it best the more people understand how D&D works to some extent if they want to watch the series or other D&D series, because then they can better understand, like, what the hell's happening. So I'm going to put at least some effort into explaining some of what's going on around here. And I got my player's manual. My player's handbook is right here with a couple bookmarks in here. And I might have to stop to think about stuff every now and then because I'm genuinely building my character, but I'll try to edit those parts out after I get done explaining what choice I'm making. Then I'll like hammer down what the choice is. Then I'll be like, oh, here's the choice I made. And one of the upsides here is you get to also have some understanding of what kind of character I'm playing this time around, and we can kind of work that out together and all that. So as far as what's my background with D&D, long time ago, way back in high school, I just heard about D&D. It was 3.5. I rented the manual from the library and got a little excited. I was making my monk character. I filled out my character sheet. Specifically, I remember doing it in a tent. Like I was on a camping trip, and I was filling out a character sheet in a tent, like in the middle of the night by flashlight. I don't know why those events like coincided. I've been on so few camping trips, but I guess they did. Then we went to a local tabletop store that night, and not the night, sorry, I don't know why I said that. We later went to a tabletop store, which was where we're going to like the back room to play D&D, and there was just this circle of people all around like this. We're all sitting in this booth, like against the wall, like it's like a restaurant booth. and we're playing D&D. It's my first session ever. I kind of barely knew what I was doing. I don't actually remember any of the details of what I did necessarily. But what I do remember is it was one person that brought me, that was my friend, and then a bunch of people I didn't know. And one of those people was the dungeon master. And that dungeon master was getting increasingly frustrated because he clearly had a really specific plan for what the campaign was supposed to be and what was supposed to happen in this story. And the players kept him like completely like either going in different directions or doing things other than what he expected them to do, or completely subverting whatever challenges or puzzles he had by being clever or doing the things that the characters are capable of doing, which not the best first session. He got very frustrated. He was noticeably annoyed, and then we never did it again. So I never played D&D again for years. And it was just a little one-off story thing, like, oh, that was weird. Nowadays I'm like more aware of like, okay, that was probably, I get the feeling that was probably an inexperienced dungeon master that wasn't fully prepared for the like what it's like to be a dungeon master, because I mean we're all high school students, so we probably didn't have like years of experience. We've barely been around for years, and D&D is kind of a niche thing and all that. But the thing about that's cool about specifically D&D and role-playing tabletop games and so on is that kind of anything can happen, which makes the dungeon master's job really hard because they have to improvise and kind of make up stuff on the fly or react and become the world. Because it's like the dungeon master is every character and the world itself simultaneously, and is none of the party members, basically. That's what's so crazy about D&D, and just assume whenever I say D&D that I also mean all other tabletop games. I'm not going to keep specifying that. I specifically only mean D&D when I talk about a mechanic that's specific to D&D, which is not what I mean when I talk about RPGs in general. But like when you play Fallout or Divinity or Original Sin or any other like RPG type game, and you do a thing and the world reacts to you, you can be impressed by the things that it does to react to you, but oftentimes you think like, wow, there's only so many things. It's usually the really impressive thing comes from like, wow, I can't believe they had dialogue about that thing that I did. The game knows I did that. Or, I did this one really weird thing. Like I played I did that little like micro series that never got finished on Fallout 3 that was like Patreon sponsored like years ago, where I made a stupid character and I was going to blow up Megaton, but I was too stupid to blow up Megaton, so I needed drugs to blow up Megaton, because I needed drugs to make my brain think good, and that was a problem for me. So I met up with this guy, this local drug dealer, and met up with him in his weird little place where he wanted me to, where he was going to sell me some drugs, and then I bought the drugs from him, and then I shot him as he was leaving the room to take my money back. So I actually just took the drugs and the money, because like, why would I care? Why would I have misgivings about killing him? My plan is to blow the whole town up. And then I, go off and blow up the town and so on, and enjoy that. Like, those kind of interactions, like those little moments, like when you get to do something beyond the obvious choices, is usually what's really cool about some RPG video games. Like moments like that where I can, like, oh, like in a bad game, you would want to blow up the town, but you wouldn't have the stat for it. And you'd be like, well, I guess I can't blow up the town, and then you just move on with your life, and that storyline just goes away. But a better game lets you buy special drugs that let you find an alternate way to blow up the town, and an even better game lets you shoot the merchant that you bought the drugs from to take your money back once they agreed to meet with you, so that you can take your money and the drugs and blow up the town with no cost to you, except for maybe the bullet. Like, those are increasing levels of complexity, and as you might imagine, video games are expensive to make, and there's a lot to them, so like doing all that is hard. And so that's why RPG video games almost never fully realize the potential of what they could be as a genre, because it's hard and expensive, and like it's so expensive compared to the profits you make from it that basically every AAA company has completely stopped making RPGs. Hooray! The genre is dying. Hooray! It's not really dying, because CD Projekt Red will prop up its corpse single-handedly by being the only kind of AAA thing, because they're kind of a AAA indie company, because they have a mountain of money, but they're not beholden to a different publisher as far as I'm aware, or so on. But like, BioWare is like a rotting corpse at this point, and all the other AAA companies that made RPGs pretty much all died already. So we're pretty much down to like maybe BioWare surprised us sometime, but probably not. That Anthem was not a good sign. And everyone who ever made the good BioWare stuff is pretty much gone anyway. So it's pretty much just Cyberpunk. And like Witcher came out years ago, and we're just now getting to Cyberpunk. So like, yeah, it's going to be a while between CD Projekt Red games, but like we got some good stuff coming out this year. Maybe Outer Wilds. Outer Worlds. Shit. Outer Worlds. It is Worlds, right? Yeah. That's a bit of a surprise. I guess that is kind of a AAA kind of RPG style thing that kind of came out of a surprise. That company is they come and go. They're a surprise because that's Obsidian. So like they do Pillars of Eternity and stuff like that. And we got Disco Elysium this year. We got some good stuff. So the people that are fans of the genre don't have to worry about it being dead. It's just that like there's an inherent conflict between how hard it is to make an RPG and how much money is actually allotted to making RPGs. And so despite being arguably the most expensive genre to make, we aren't getting that money because it's all going to like Call of Duty and Fortnite. So it's kind of just part of the whole industry is like we kind of just get used to like taking what we can from indie and AA developers, which can be genuinely fantastic, like Disco Elysium and stuff like that. But there's also like a lot of like Euro jank AA RPGs that come out that like they have a lot of cut corners, and each one's a total it's just a total mixed bag every single time they make a new game, and you're like, well, I'll just take what I can that's good out of this and just deal with the bad that's here because these people had to make this game on a schedule and a budget, and you know, it's all that's left. That whole thing. But what's cool about tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons is that budget kind of goes out the window. You can just make shit up, and because you have an actual human being that's running the entire world, depending on how good they are at doing that, they can just make the possibilities happen. So you don't need like a team of programmers to make 12 different characters with all of their assets and character models and then program the AI to react to all the specific things that you want to do in this particular situation, and then also voice act all of those things, which means you need to pre-write all of the possibilities that your game is going to allow for, and then voice act all of those possibilities, because voice acting is like relatively mandatory, especially for the 3D like first person RPGs like Fallout and stuff like that. Like there's so many levels of complexity there that you can just throw out the window because you're playing D&D and you're just looking at a map. You're looking at a map, and sometimes there's not even a map, and you guys are just making it up in your heads, and your characters probably don't have custom art at all, and you just have like a figure or nothing, and you just kind of fill in the blanks there, and the dungeon master plays all the characters, so he can just make the world react to you, and your whole D&D session can go in a completely different direction than anyone was ever planning, whether using a module or a custom world that was kind of planned out or what. Like it could just go into a completely different direction. Like my most recent D&D campaign that we were doing at Marty's house that ended abruptly and just didn't happen anymore, partly because one of the players was being a dick, and the DM was new at it, and that's just not a good mix when you have a veteran player that's kind of just being awful, and you have a new dungeon master that's just trying to hold this together, and that's just a bad mix. But we were gearing up to do like a heist where we steal a dragon egg, and it's like I don't think that was anywhere in the script for what was happening at all in the module we were playing, which was some kind of like Underdark pre-packed thing. I was just very amused by like stuff just happened in ways and so on. But as far as my backstory, because I'm already off topic, because I always am. Played it in high school for one session. Was very let down by the fact that I spent a lot of time like making my monk character, and then never got to actually really play them really. But then I went on to get to college, to geology majoring and all that, and we had this. I was like, hey, we should hang out during the summer, all of us, because we had like a group of friends, and so we started meeting up to do tabletop games, and it was like the first one we were totally unprepared, so we had like apples to apples and Yahtzee and some bullshit, and then we quickly moved on to like Munchkin and Elder Sign and much more interesting things, and Arkham Horror, and it kept going in more directions till finally we just broke out D&D outright, and that got interesting quickly. I did a thing that in my character that I quickly recognized as being a trope for new players. I made a half orc who was a hunter, and he was racist. And so because he was racist, he didn't want to really deal with all of these other characters in the party, which was my way of dealing with the fact that I was kind of afraid of like improvising dialogue. So I just made like this character that had an incentive not to interact with the other characters so much. I will, going forward, I've seen multiple instances of other players doing similar things, not specifically that, but like different things where they come up with an excuse for why their character won't speak so much because they're not like ready for that like drama club shit yet, because it takes a while to get yourself ready for that weirdness. I still feel like I'm bad at that anyway, but you know, if you're running a show, you're gonna have to talk. That guy in particular, there's a story I always like where we split the party, and everyone was exploring this tomb, and I kind of stealthed away unbeknownst to everybody, and I found this massive room full of gold and treasure and a giant like scorpion sleeping on top of it like a dragon. And the scorpion was so big it had grown up inside that room, like it must have been put in that room, then grew larger and now couldn't leave the room because it was so big. So I used to do a little stealth check to sneak inside and steal some of the treasures. And he kept making me do stealth checks over and over again. Each time I did a different step of this process, I got my way in, picking up the loot, leaving, and so on. And there was also a thing I had to climb over on the way in and out that was kind of blocking the door. And so I kept passing every single stealth check all the way up until the moment where I was leaving the room, at which point I failed the stealth check. The scorpion woke up. I felt badly too, if I remember correctly. And the scorpion grabs me with its giant claw, and it's like grappling me and crunching me to death and all that. It's like its claw, I think, was around me, and it was outside the room, so it grabbed me while I was already leaving the room. So it's in the inside. It can't reach me really, besides the claw that's already around me. I think the fact that it had opened its claw and grabbed me made it so that it couldn't even pull its claw back through the door to it. So it was kind of trapped with its arms sticking through the gate, and it keeps grappling me, and it's doing a lot of damage to me, and I can't escape. And then it like critically fails at grappling me on its like final check, and so it just drops me out of range, and it can't pick me back up. But I'm unconscious because I'm at 0 or negative hit points. Like I'm between conscious and dead, or unconscious and dead or something. And it's like the only reason I survived this whole thing was because like both the scorpion and I kept making successful checks all the way until the moment we didn't at the last possible second, which in my case led to a failed stealth thing, but still got all the loot, just some broken bones probably. And the scorpion like almost killed me until it didn't, and then I was just out of its range, and it couldn't reach me anymore, couldn't pick me back up because I fell down to the ground, and it was already at the extent of how far it could reach. And it's like, well, that was lucky, huh? But there's some lessons for role-playing to be taken from here and there for some of the stuff. So like here I was doing something that some people look down on, which is I was splitting the party, which is when you leave the main party, because then you have the dungeon master has to run 2 games simultaneously, kind of, and you kind of go back and forth between the 2 narratives. And depending on, I think in this situation it was fine, but in some situations really, really extreme splits of the party where like major things are happening in different locations can sometimes get really messy. But it wasn't such a big deal in this case. But that character ended up dying, not there, but later in the same temple, actually. It wasn't really my fault. Just bad news happened. So I came back as a druid, and this is going to be seen as an example of bad storytelling here. But by the way, just looking back at the scorpion thing, like, what a ridiculous, insane scenario. Like, this is the weirdness of me stealthing in and out, and then the scorpion doing that and all that. Like, it's really hard to imagine that mechanically playing out in a video game. Like that even being a mechanic set and a rule set that could even be implemented. And I find that kind of interesting. Like, that's such a weird, specific experience. But since my character died, I rolled a new character, and was back the next session with a new character and so on. They're still exploring the temple, so I came up with the role-playing concept of like, well, they're exploring a weird pyramid temple in the middle of like the jungle, so I'm just gonna make some kind of druid character that's actually like some kind of watcher of that area, and he's like keeping an eye on these people because that's infringing in this territory, and like he's gonna end up being getting mixed up into the story as a result. But as an example of bad role playing, there's a concept called player knowledge and character knowledge, and I try to keep this part straight as much as I can sometimes. The difference is the stuff that I know as a human who's playing playing a tabletop game that's not real, and I know things as a result, versus what the character that I'm playing knows in universe and what they reasonably would know. This was a concept that was applied poorly by many players that I've seen before, and this is going to be an example of that. So I kept spying on these people as various white druid shape-shifting forms. I made a shape-shifting druid that could like go into a few different forms, and as kind of a motif, I just had this idea that like there would be a consistent color to the forms to sort of implement this idea that like it's almost like a recognizable motif to the appearances of the forms, basically. Like it, so they would just kind of see like a white wolf pass by, and then they see like a white like hawk perched up in a window or whatever the hell. And Ben just like attacks me for some reason, and it's like I guess because he knows that I'm a player because I'm here. But like I'm just trying to do this cute thing where like we foreshadow the introduction of a new character by like repeatedly encountering these very tertiary creatures in a wildlife area. Like this is an area that has wildlife in it, so it's not weird to see a random creature just kind of around. They're not hostile. They're not attacking you. They're not even near you really. They're just kind of over there and going by. Sometimes they look at you and then they leave and so on. It's like they're supposed to have more important fish to fry. There's shit going on, like things are attacking them and so on. But like they just decided to start attacking me at one point because they just knew I was me, the human player that's playing a druid. And it's like, disappointing. I've seen some people that are good at role playing games, and some people are just really bad at it. And people, because if you approach this as a video game, you're used to thinking of like being good or bad at something as being termed in terms of like how well you play it mechanically. And it's like, no, it's not about like winning the fights. It's like, are you good at interacting with this group of people and making like things happen? And it's like, if you're breaking character so strongly and acting really strangely, then that's just kind of weird. In this case, he was like a monk that was supposed to be kind of, he had all these like vows and he was supposed to be all like peaceful and stuff. So his weird bloodlust was odd, and his attacking of random animals without actually doing any checks to verify that he knew it was a druid or anything is just like weird. So that was always like a bad example of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, there's cool shit that goes in. Like that same druid was when I fell in love with druids in the first place in D&D, because we later stormed a castle, and as we were storming that castle, I went into my travel form because I was playing as a special variant of druid that's in the I think it's the Advanced Player's Handbook or whatever, the extended rule set for 3.5. Where you could do like variants of various classes. This one did not have an animal familiar because 3.5 druids had animal familiars. Instead, he could shapeshift, and instead of shapeshifting into like any animal, because normally you like can shapeshift into any animal and you get the stats of that animal, this one had like dedicated forms. So I had a travel form and a combat form and a flight form and so on, that had like different roles to them, and each one had dedicated stats, and they actually leveled up as I leveled up. So I actually had I had an entire character sheet for each of my forms that kept track of what their stats were and so on, because they were actually dedicated. They were consistent creatures that had specific rules. I could shapeshift way more than normal. I could do it really consistently, as opposed to having like a limit on how many times I could do it per day. But I didn't have an animal familiar, so that's like the trade-off that they do there. One thing in particular is I call them a travel form, but I had like a white wolf. I had like a white like dire wolf that was like more of a combat, or no, was it more of a bear actually? I think I had a bear form. I think I had a wolf form, a bear form, and and eventually I'd have like a flight form or something. The main gimmick of the wolf form is that he just went way faster than normal. Most players have a movement speed of 30, which means they can move 30 feet per turn. And I think if you do a sprinting action, you can do 2 movement actions per turn or something like that. But like, everyone's approaching this keep. We apparently need to attack this place. It's got a bunch of like orcs or whatever on top of the wall, and they're all shooting crossbow bolts at everybody. And there's cool shit happening. My friend Sid, he was playing a turtle, like wizard or something, and he's like conjuring force fields and like trying to protect the party, and where they're all trying to slowly approach. But I just shapeshift into my travel form and I just sprint at the side of this place. I sprint right up to the keep, go right around the corner, so I'm just out of line of sight of all the archers that are on top of the wall. I shapeshift into my whatever form. I don't remember what, was he also he might have also been a half-orc, actually. I might have done another half-orc, I don't remember anymore what the actual I don't remember what his race was. I go around the corner and I use like stone shape or something to create a passage, very Full Metal Alchemist inspired, where I wanted to like be able to like alchemize the environment and shapeshift it and so on. So I like created a passage in the side of the wall. I open up, I get inside this keep, and I seem to have entered into their armory. And this is around the time where something ridiculous starts happening on top of the wall. The orcs keep crit failing, which is when you roll a d20, you get a crit if you get a 20. You can also get crits on other numbers sometimes, but we won't get into that right now. And you get a crit fail if you get a 1. This is the ridiculous part of D&D usually, is that something crazy happens in both cases. Usually it's like a crit is usually like just big bad news. Like this is a big, either it's like a heavy attack, and sometimes the dungeon master might like roleplay it as being like something crazy and ends up happening, like especially if it's not an attack. Like if it's a skill check and you perform something or do some kind of task and then you succeed at it, then like some sort of extra flourish might be added, or you might get some sort of extra reward, or something really cool happens. If you crit fail, something really bad can happen. And the way this guy was interpreting it is that there's all these archers that were shooting their bows and so on, when they would crit fail, their weapon would break. And so they would go down to the armory in order to get a new weapon, and so they could run back up and fight them. This led to a situation where a series of archers from upstairs were running single file into fighting me. Oh, that's why it was bears. Now I remember. I summoned an army of bears as a druid, and then I think I shapeshifted into my direwolf form. And so the room was full of bears and me, which is already bad without the bears, and a bunch of orcs with no weapons because their weapon broke when they crit failed are walking single file down here one by one to fix their shit. And so what happens is, even before my allies reach the keep, one by one, orcs are just mysteriously vanishing and they don't know why. And it's just a really funny little narrative that I always enjoyed about that. I love druids because they could do just weird things oftentimes. Like, you think of spellcasters especially in video games, because video games have a very limited way of implementing mechanics, and almost everything is built around violence and how to violently do things. So when you think of a spellcaster in a video game, you think of somebody that like shoots a fireball, or like chain lightning, or a frozen orb, or maybe you can freeze people like dead in their tracks, or paralyze them, or put them to sleep, or like, you're used to like status effects and damage as being like basically what spells are in video games. You get a lot of this from like playing your Elder Scrolls games and so on like that. Like there's just like a limit to what you ever do. Like it's unimaginative and it's disappointing. Like, one of the bummers about MMORPGs, in particular like World of Warcraft, is that like a world of role playing is supposed to be like a world of role playing. It's like the possibilities there are so enticing and exciting, and then you play an actual MMORPG like World of Warcraft or EverQuest or whatnot, and really what you do is you pretty much just attack things a lot, and the numbers go up saying you did a good job, here's your next quest, here's your next level or whatever. You don't make any story decisions. Even by video game standards, our MMORPGs are bad RPGs because you can't like make choices of what to do in most MMORPG quests, especially World of Warcraft. You just get a task, complete task, get reward. Get a new task, complete task, get a reward. And the most interesting thing about playing those games is usually just that you pick a lot of tasks up and then try to strategically like pick out what order to do all these tasks in a nice, like, consistent and like a efficient loop where you get all this stuff done in one go. And then you're like, oh cool, I got all this stuff done. Now I can get a bunch of rewards back to back. And like, that was a very efficient little session I did. Like, it's not role playing. You're not doing cool, interesting things with your character, and you're also not role playing because you're not making any choices or doing anything. This is even more true for modern World of Warcraft, because like you at least had the RPG mechanics of like customizing your character with like special skills and talents back in the day, but now you really just pick a class and then your characters automatically progress with almost no customization nowadays. So it's World of Warcraft's even become less of an RPG over time in the like strictest like, you know, sense of what an RPG actually is. This is why I'm critical of like JRPGs, and like I'd be like, those aren't real RPGs. And I'm not trying to say they're not good games. I'm just saying that they're not good RPGs because you don't role play in them at all. It's usually what you usually just fight a bunch of random monsters, and then a movie plays, and then you fight more monsters, then more movies play, and you just watch the movie, and that's the story. And it's like that's exactly as much RPGing, that's as much role playing as every other video game that isn't called a JRPG. So it's not an RPG in my book. But I have to call it a JRPG because that's what language is. We've decided on that at this point. But I quickly loved all the weird things I could do as my druid, like circumventing entire areas and doing weird tricks like that. Like there was a part where there was a weird trap where gravity inverted and the ceiling was covered in spikes, and gravity inverted, and oh god, what are we gonna do? And I just turned into a bird and I just flew down the hallway, and it was no big deal. Because druids are all about having a weird utility belt of surprises that solve all your problems. And like, I think that's pretty cool. I like that. I think that's neato. Where am I going with this? That's just more of that. This is more side stories. I'm trying to run down my line of different RPG experiences to some extent. Another example of bad role-playing, I dabbled in Vampire the Masquerade and Shadowrun. Shadowrun was not a great session. Sid brought a friend in that liked to run Shadowrun games that we'd never met before, and I didn't know what Shadowrun was as a setting at all. I was just kind of assigned the job of fixer, which was like the worst job to get, because if I remember correctly, the basis of my job was that like I was the guy who knew people and had connections and so on, and could like manifest things and like get stuff done and make jobs happen and all that. So I pretty much just had to keep turning to the DM and asking what I do, because I didn't know what my character did, and I also didn't know what the world was. So I was kind of like passively letting things happen. This guy, he tried so hard. He set up one of the other characters, like she got to be a femme fatale, and she's having a great time. And by the end, she had fired like this giant laser that took out the corner of an entire building or something, and like it was this massive cataclysmic ending to the session that was clearly planned as being like this big wow moment. And like he was really trying to like pizzazz this whole up as being a cool intro session for Shadowrun, and kudos to him. But like I was definitely not really sure what was happening the whole time, and I was like, I'm just gonna try to politely get through this. It wasn't great. I had never played any Shadowrun game before then, and didn't actually really know what the setting was even supposed to be, and it just kind of, it could have gone better. I have a bad history of like being assigned characters and then just like not knowing what to do with it or whatnot, and so on. But then, as far as bad role playing by other people, again, there was a. Oh god, I almost forgot about this. I'll get to that later. So we tried a little bit of Vampire the Masquerade. I made we actually know a little bit more about Vampire the Masquerade now, because I played Bloodlines on this channel like a year ago or something, and at the time, though, this was my first experience with the universe. It's like, okay, it's modern day. There's vampires and werewolves and stuff like that, and that's just normal. But it's called a masquerade because you're supposed to not reveal that you're a vampire to the modern world and all that stuff. What I did is I made like I keep wanting to say Char, but Char is the beast people from Beauty and the... No, I almost said Beauty and the Beast. The beast people from Guild Wars 2 that look like Beast from Beauty and the Beast, basically. They're basically the same creature type as far as I could tell. But no, I think it starts with a C, though. But I was playing as that particular faction? Family? Clan. I think it's the right word for the different classes, basically, that exist in Vampire. And I like the whole like boons and flaws system where you can have like good things and bad things for your character, and you kind of give yourself bad things that give you a budget to buy good things. So it's like it's designed like you're given incentive to give your character flaws and defects and problems they're gonna have to deal with throughout the campaign, because those give you a budget of points you can spend to buy good things for your character to counteract those things and so on. I made my character somebody that like couldn't pass the masquerade, so they had to like cover themselves, or they wouldn't be able to like pass through human society without revealing themselves and all that. And I was interested in that character, but we didn't get very far. But what went really poorly is that what went really poorly with that particular campaign is that the role playing was so bad. Because one of the things I found is that a lot of people who are not used to tabletop RPGs and they're just used to video game RPGs, they're used to treating it as like a series of combat encounters and dungeons that reward you with loot and experience. Which, to be fair, is what video game RPGs do almost exclusively, especially if you associate RPG as being like Diablo 2 and 3 and stuff like that, where you just get dumped into a world where the only way of interacting with the world is to hit things, and then they pinata out a bunch of like gold and rewards all over the floor and stuff like that. That whole thing, which admittedly I was there once. Like once upon a time, because I was a Diablo player and a World of Warcraft player and so on. And I played Fallout 3 and I'm like, this is fucking rad. And so when I ran out of Fallout 3 to play, I was like, I should go play Fallout like 1 and 2. And then when I looked at Fallout 1 and 2, I was like, this doesn't feel right, because it looks like Diablo but it doesn't play like Diablo. And I didn't get any very far. And I actually had another experience with that where I played Dungeons and Dragons: The Temple of Elemental Evil. Was my first ever CRPG. I bought it on a whim off the shelves of that very same video game store, the very same tabletop store where I would end up trying to play D&D once. It just had the PC like giant cardboard box that PC games came in, and I tried playing Temple of Elemental Evil when I got home, and I couldn't figure out how to even play the game. I was so not ready for that, because video games were just not like that. I had never played Baldur's Gate or any other like CRPG before, so like I genuinely just wasn't ready for that idea. It's like giving somebody who played Duck Hunt and Mario and Ninja Gaiden a copy of Myst and just sitting them down with no context, which is also a thing that happened to me. I played a bunch of Nintendo games as a kid, and then I played Myst one day on my like grandmother's computer, and I genuinely didn't understand what I was looking at or what this was, because I was just like, my media exposure had not expanded in that way correctly. And this is what happens. It's like I don't look down on people that do this stuff necessarily, because it's like you just part of the growth there. But some people refuse to grow when they're exposed to different ideas, and this story is going to be kind of an example of that. We're playing Vampire the Masquerade. We're in a suburban neighborhood, and we're supposed to we're just supposed to go, like, we're just here. We had some kind of vague mission. We're kind of looking for something or something, but like Ben and Jake's response to the situation was to just kind of like break into various houses. Like they just picked a door and went in it, and if they saw like something moving in the darkness, they would like attack it, which led to a few situations where like somebody would like come running out the door on fire, and they'd like murder them in front of their house in the front yard and all that. And they kept like berating me for like not like attacking and like not like taking part in the dungeon and everything like that. And this whole time I just kept staying out on the sidewalk and just kind of watching and being like, what are you doing? And like they're just kind of working their way down the street, attacking things, asking like what kind of loot there was and stuff like that. And I'm like, this isn't a dungeon. This is just a suburban neighborhood where people are like sleeping because it's nighttime, and you're just like lynching people. Like it's I was clearly taking to the RPG like both character knowledge elements and also like role-playing elements faster than these people were, apparently, because they just were clearing the environment like it's a Diablo 2 zone. And I was just so confused. I'm like, why is this happening? Stop that. I don't know. It's a fun little moment though. It's informative because you learn about what kind of players people are and how people interact with this art form, and like you can kind of look back in the context of like, because I'm like Dr. Manhattaning this entire conversation apparently, where I keep jumping in time so much, but like it's like, but like I can't meme that, I can't recreate that scene, but that Dr. Manhattan scene where he's like he's dropping, something's falling to the ground, but simultaneously this is happening, and simultaneously this is happening. It's supposed to like symbolize how he's in multiple places at once because he's unstuck from time. That's kind of the idea coming to mind of like my way of currently processing this conversation or this podcast or whatever I'm doing, is that I'm like talking about this in the context of like, I'm watching these people dumbfounded, like right now it's 2019, last day of the year. I'm looking at my D&D character sheet and wondering about how long I'm going to spend before I actually do anything with the actual controls of this computer before I finish these stories and all that. But simultaneously, I'm also a vampire watching my classmates from geology very poorly roleplay because they don't understand anything besides dungeon crawling and looting and killing. But at the same time, I'm also a young boy who is playing Temple of Elemental Evil for the first time and doesn't understand what the fuck is happening because I've only ever played Diablo 2. It's like I'm all these people at once and none of these people. Woo. Oh, this is a mess. This is gonna be. I wonder if maybe this will be the. Oh god, I'm already so far in. This will be a New Year's Eve special event. This will be all of the videos for New Year's Eve. No other videos will come out this day. People will hate that probably. I don't know, or they'll love it. Special event. Holidays are a good excuse for special. You should all be doing fun things instead of being here. Whatever. This is a massive inefficient thing for my schedule to be doing right now. But like I couldn't bring myself to like get work done today, so like. The fact that I'm doing this at all, I guess this will just have to be what I'm doing this day. It's just that variety is good, right? Or not? I don't know. Maybe this will be a series of videos that come out today. I'm talking about this while I'm in the video. This is really good formatting. But no, you just learn from people that do this kind of stuff. So I think one of the words that comes up is murder hobo. It's just like it's just a word that Dungeon Masters sometimes use to describe certain kinds of players. There's a bunch of different archetypes of player types, and one of them is the murder hobo, which is somebody that just kills and loots and levels up and so on. And maybe you can make them like neutral evil or chaotic neutral or some sort of like alignment that explains that, or maybe the Dungeon Master just kind of works around that, and it's like, oh, this isn't much of a story playthrough, and not all role-playing is going to happen, but sure, let's just play out some combat scenarios, I guess. But for me, what's really cool about D&D is that so much of the game can be about not combat. And a really cool thing about that is like, yeah, I've had multiple sessions of tabletop RPG sessions where like no one rolls an attack die the entire session. It's like 3 or 4 hours, and we're like all enraptured in what's happening. We're fully engaged, we're having fun, shit's going down, plenty of things are happening, but no one ever hits somebody with a stick and then they take damage from the stick hit. And it's like, one of the failures of RPGs is how much they how much one of the failures of video game RPGs is how much they just don't ever succeed at recreating why that's so cool. So I don't know, I just wanted to share some stories with you guys that explains some of the stuff that I find cool. And if you want to, you can also dip into like I have a pre-existing RPG. I have an already existing D&D playlist on this channel where we did D&D, but it's been a while since that happened too. So I just wanted to reintroduce some of you guys to this whole idea, and you could hear some stories of silly things that happened or whatnot, and hopefully you guys will be open to some cool stuff that happens going forward. But Sid eventually decided to punish these people, as particularly Ben, for role-playing poorly. So when we were back at playing D&D 3.5, he was playing a monk that had like various vows. And so there's a concept called character alignment that's really important to, let's see. Let's bring this up for you guys, because I can help explain this to you guys as we go. Oh my god, there's too many memes. I just want the real pictures instead of memes. This will have to do. Boop boop. Yeah. There we go. Should be on screen somewhere. Boop boop. Offset slightly. There we go. I'm a master streamer that definitely is used to using OBS on the fly and so on. I don't like looking at myself. Oh no, I can see myself. So we got this guy right here. This is the alignment chart of D&D. So we got lawful good, neutral good, chaotic good, lawful neutral, true neutral, chaotic neutral, lawful evil, neutral evil, chaotic evil. You can look up a wiki page that'll explain to these in great detail. I'm not going to do that because it's really exhausting to explain 9 roles. But generally, the idea here is that these describe some idea of how the morality of your character works. You're either good or evil, which of course is not always easy to define because that's still what we're working on in real life and all that. And then you're either lawful or chaotic, or anywhere in between of those two ideas. And so it's a spectrum of those. I love this chart, not because it's perfect for making a character concept, but because this is a really old role-playing concept that still illustrates a really important lesson for people to take out of real life, which is what is legal and illegal is not always the same thing as what is right and wrong. And a fucking tabletop RPG from like decades ago already had that illustrated for a bunch of nerds and stuff like that. And it's like, it's surprisingly hard to convince people of this concept sometimes, because there's also, like for example, there's often an idea of like, if you're in jail, you deserve to be in jail because you broke the law, and everyone who's in jail is a criminal and doesn't deserve to vote and doesn't deserve all these other things because they're all criminals, and how dare they break those laws, without ever really stopping to take a look at how much those laws are like important or not, or whether or not those laws are worth ruining people's lives over and stuff like that. So it's like, I don't know, man. A good example of that is like nowadays, like a huge percentage of people that are in jail are there for drug offenses, and it's like, are these many lives worth ruining because drugs, of all things? Like the number of these people that are non-violent offenders, for example, like it's like, then you look into the background of like how drugs became so illegal and why they're punishable in these ways, and then you're like, this whole system's really questionable, and this order of operations and like sequence of events is all like very suspect, and yet that's the base under which so many people are labeled as being criminals, which is like shorthand for like being bad for society and all that, which is like, yeah, to be fair, like as a child you're immediately programmed to think that criminals are bad, and so like, but like even this game from the get-go is able to illustrate the idea that like, wait, what's criminal and what's bad are not always the same thing, just like how what's legal and what's good is not always the same thing. Just like how a lot of things that Amazon does are legal, but not good. And a lot of things that people are in jail for sometimes are like, well, they're not necessarily bad, but they're illegal, so they're in jail. You could argue that them breaking the law is itself like a bad thing to do, but like that's like, I don't know, a lot of us break the law in certain ways that we just kind of don't see as being that big of a deal, because it's like, well, it's us, right? And you know, we didn't hurt anybody with that thing when you speed or whatever the hell you did. I think everyone has broken the law X number of times, even if they didn't mean to, because there's just a lot of laws and all that. I've known people who like shit on people that are in jail. Like, if you didn't want to do the time, you shouldn't have done the crime, and people shouldn't be able to vote if they're in those situations, because like but then like I know that person has done crimes because I know them, because like, and it's like I've seen that play out so many times in my life, and it's like people just like, I don't know, there's a cognitive dissonance there that's kind of rough. So I love that this chart exists. I love that like what's good and evil and lawful and unlawful are separate from each other. And so specifically, you could be lawful evil, which is a fun concept. It's somebody who does bad things and is self-serving and selfish and horrible and corrupt, but they're like maybe a politician or something like that, or like somebody that like works within the mainframe of like within the guidelines of the system to do bad things while not necessarily doing things that are illegal and so on. And I find those ideas really interesting. But I bring this up because if you play certain religious characters in particular, like a monk or especially a paladin, the basis of all of your powers is often determined by your alignment and how like correctly you subscribe to what kind of person you're supposed to be, because you're often religiously devoted, and your religious devotion gives you your abilities. And so if you stray from the path of who you're supposed to be as a person, you can actually lose those powers, which is really interesting. Sid, who was not the dungeon master but is a more informed player, was in this particular session trying to punish Ben for constantly kind of not role-playing correctly. In this case, we had somebody, we used the deck of many things earlier in the campaign, and that resulted in an NPC companion with us also drew from the deck of many things, and they got a companion character that was like a weird like servant summon thing. But then that NPC died like weeks later in the campaign, and the servant kind of like lashed out and panicked and went crazy, and so we subdued them, and Ben was deciding that we should kill this person, whereas I was arguing the other way around. And it's like, what the fuck, you can't just kill them. They're like, as far as we can tell, they're a real person, maybe, I think. And I was like, why is Ben arguing this way? But in particular, Sid was taking Ben's side, and I was really confused why Sid was doing that, because I was especially sure that Sid knew better. And then we later on, Sid's taking a smoke break, and he talks to me, and he tells me that like, yeah, he was trying to sabotage Ben's character, because if Ben did decide to murder this person in cold blood for whatever nonsense reason he had, he was going to end up sabotaging, like, he's gonna, in one way or another, he's either gonna have to end up breaking his oath, or he's going to probably lose his alignment, or this or that, which have resulted in consequences for how his character worked as a person. And it's like, he was the whole reason why he was being intentionally facetious and frustrating for me to argue with was because he was trying to sabotage Ben's character, because he was frustrated with how Ben keeps not role playing correctly and so on. So he was going to do that, and it was an amusing outcome. I was like, oh, you son of a bitch. You were genuinely pissing me off, because I knew you had to know better than what you were saying. So I was like, why are you being such a weird idiot? It's like, oh, it's because you're also sick of what Ben's doing here with this goddamn murder hobo nonsense when he's supposed to be a monk with all these like oaths and shit. I found that interesting. And like these entire dilemmas around what to do with a person are just so much more interesting in these contexts than they often are in the original. I mean, not original, in a video game context, where it's usually like, I don't know, you get a binary dialogue choice, you pick one or the other. I took a little bit of a break. It's been a bit. I was hungry, so I just stopped for a bit, because that's what I can do. But since we're talking about alignments, actually they have another alignment related story that's kind of interesting. Just something so specific to not only the roleplay aspect of D&D, but also the multiplayer aspect of D&D, which are kind of the two core things about the thing that are so interesting all the time. This is so So we were playing a campaign with a paladin, and paladins are pretty much always supposed to be lawful good or some lawful evil ones. They're the most restrictive of the classes, or the one that comes to mind for me at least as being the most restrictive. The paladins pretty much just have to follow the law, and they have to be altruistic, and they have to be helpful and good and kind, and, you know, total Boy Scouts, basically, as far as they can, like, as far as their own judgment goes, or so on. Because if they err from that faith and that adherence to that way of life, then they can lose their entire everything. And it both is like in gameplay combat mechanics sense and everything, like they lose like their class and their ability to do all the things that they're known for doing, but even like in the world sense, like the paladin would lose their hook to who they are supposed to be as a person and so on. But I was playing a campaign where this particular paladin, he was rewarded with a special weapon that was like a flaming sword or something kind of thing, where it was like a hilt that expelled out a weapon. Like, it was kind of like a lightsaber, really, but this lightsaber was conscious. It could speak, it could think, like I think it could speak, or at least he could get feelings from it or something like that. It could communicate in one way or another. And what happened is he used that sword to execute somebody when they were down, and then the sword turned off and it wouldn't turn on again. And this was very entertaining because it pretty quickly became clear to everybody around the table, except the paladin, why the sword wasn't obeying him anymore. But he kept stubbornly going into different combat scenarios and just trying to forcefully, like, just use the sword, and it wasn't working, and he would just like, and he was like getting cut down basically, and he was like, this is how this is going to be, like, you're either going to work or we're both going to die and stuff like that. And it was just like, it was really funny because it was so clearly like a judgment of him and his behaviors why the sword wasn't working at that moment. But instead of like turning around and like either changing his behavior or just resigning himself to an existence without the special sword that frankly he didn't even have for most of the campaign anyway, it was a recent reveal, he just kept stubbornly dealing with this. And on some level, I think it's because of like the narratives we're used to in fiction, where like you're the chosen one, and like a weapon, like this is a totem of power. It's like it's like King Arthur's sword and stuff like that, like the archetypical like special weapon that the hero is given to do their thing. And so being rejected by that, like in the Thor sort of way, like getting rejected by your weapon is like hurtful. And if you're maybe playing a role-playing game with a little less self-awareness than you should, and you're playing as yourself maybe a bit too much, then you like kind of feel judged by that. And so he was getting judged by his own weapon and rejected. And it was interesting that everyone around the table except for him seemed to understand why it was happening too, but he just kept stubbornly trying to push forward at all costs and all that. I don't know, I just found that really interesting. It's such a weird specific thing, and it's like I don't even know how you incorporate that into a game. Like, it's potentially possible, but it's like it was so specific. It was just the dungeon master's judgment versus the player's judgment. And because the sword wasn't communicating what was going on, it didn't stop to give like 10 minutes of exposition about its like moral alignment and why it took offense to what he was doing with it and so on, and why it rejected him as a master. He was left to figure it out himself, and he was just failing to do that. And it was just, all right, then I guess you don't get to be the hero, or at least you don't get to be the hero with the sword. It's the interesting situation of just watching like the role play scenario where that kind of chosen one sort of story, where you get the special weapon that's supposed to like validate you, instead rejects you. And how a person, and like a sort of the sort of character study that can come from somebody having to grapple with what happens when like the sword hones in on their character flaws and reveals them and stuff like that. I find that to be a neato thingo. But anyway, to talk about the briefly, without getting too far into it, because this isn't the character creation episode yet. I'm probably gonna do like a remake / adaptation of my Sorcerer I was doing in the campaign that was happening at Marty's house before, because that one ended prematurely, and I would have liked to go back and do that one again. But I was dabbling with the Sorcerer and having some fun with that, and specifically, I had this idea that he was a thief, and that he opened up a package he was specifically told to smuggle and not open, and it like ended up permanently making him some kind of sorcerer, but also permanently destroying the object that, or losing its value, because like it was like a single use like thing. Like I essentially destroyed it or sapped of its power or made it unuseful by consuming it essentially in that moment. And so by doing that, I make a good thing and a bad thing, and also another bad thing. It's like I am now possessing magic power, but I don't know how to use it. And my skill set and motivations are still based around being like some kind of variation of thief. So I'm like, I'm not necessarily a good character, definitely not a lawful character. And my motivations are still mostly around like stealing skill sets. And yet I'm a sorcerer now, which is a different skill set. So like I have like a high dexterity and like weird things like that. That's the character I kind of wanted to remake. But another aspect was that he, on top of being a thiefly kind of person, he also was a kind of like, he was kind of not agoraphobic, claustrophobic. He didn't want to be locked in spaces. He wouldn't go through anything that could potentially like seal him inside, generally speaking. This manifested at one point in that there were these people that were like offering tea and like wanted to show people something in like their basement. We're like in the swamp somewhere. And there was like a trap door there that they were leading everyone down to. And I just refused to go down there. So I just stayed up in the lobby and like made small talk with our hosts or whatever. And then inevitably when they turned on us, it was me versus both of them, which became a huge problem, or at least it should have been, because they were supposed to be levels higher than me and a big threat. But I had some special tricks. So many of my abilities were about not getting captured and not getting touched and not getting hit and not getting grappled and so on, that like I was actually shockingly hard to kill. Actually, I wonder if I can find the exact spell. I got my spell cards, because I need to remake this character. I wonder if I can find the exact thing, because I think it was this thing that makes you not get hit, basically. Mage armor? No, mage armor takes an action. This just gives you magic armor, essentially. It's not unrelated. I did have that. Shield. This was a cool one. I didn't know about this spell when I played a druid, because I never had a reaction spell as a druid. I didn't know reaction spells existed as a concept, but this is essentially a spell you can cast as a counteraction. An invisible barrier of magical force appears and protects you. Until the start of your next turn, you have +5 bonus to AC, including against the triggered attack, and you take no damage from magic missile. So, you cast this as a reaction, which means that you don't have to prep it. You don't have to be like, well, you have to prep it, and that has to be one of your prepared spells, but that's more of a druid thing. Sorcerers just kind of have a small list of spells that are available to them. But what happened is if somebody attacked me, I could, as a reaction, as a reflex, like not as a full turn, I didn't have to wait for my turn, I could do it as a counter to what they're doing. I can give myself +5 AC, which means that they have to roll 5 higher in order to hit me. And so what happened is they kept trying to attack me, and I kept doing stuff like this, where like I would just be like, hit, and I just would like not, I just kept being unhittable weirdly, because I had unusually high, I think it was dexterity, because of my rogue background. That was kind of the backstory. But I also had these effects that would make me harder to hit. And I think I was also using mirror image, which conjures a series of duplications of myself. So they have every time they do hit me, they have like only a 1 in 4 chance that they actually hit the real me. Otherwise, they kill one of my duplications, then that duplication is destroyed, and they then have a higher chance of hitting me next time because I have fewer duplications left. So as a result, I was actually able to hold my own against 2 enemies that were higher level than me, because they just couldn't damage me, which was funny. But the reason why they started attacking me was because I started hearing things from down in that trap door that didn't sound so good, and they figured the jig was up and they attacked me. But what happened is the rest of my party had encountered some kind of horrible demon altar down there, and they all were all gaining points of madness. You do like a sanity check that was like, I think it was wisdom or intellect or something like that, and because it's like eldritch mechanics where you gain madness points and insight points, like that kind of stuff, and you do a check to see whether or not you are able to like withstand what's happening to you without something bad happening to you. And then if you fail that check, you gain a madness point, which has other long-term ramifications for the campaign. But you also have something happen in that moment. You roll against a table. You roll a dice to find out what happens based on this table of things that can happen to you in that situation. And your insanity can trigger certain effects. In this case, it mostly led to a lot of them attacking each other, like going after each other, and lots of friendly fire and fighting going on. So when that all broke out, it was clear something was wrong, and so then the people upstairs attacked me, and so there's like two parallel things happening in two different rooms, which is always kind of fun. But then because I had to roleplay this character, like the only way I could justify, like I was like, I need to get down there, something's wrong. I've taken out these two guys. The only way I could do it is I had to physically attack the trap door. I refused to enter the trap door because I could get sealed down there. So I had to spend like a couple turns attacking the trap door so it was physically destroyed so that it couldn't be used to like seal me in. And then I could justify to myself going down inside there and so on. This is funny kind of moments that happen. Those kinds of situations. They're all just going at each other. I don't remember much else about the situation besides that specifically. But somebody in our group was pretty alright at the role playing, or at least he was having fun with a specific aspect, is that he was playing as a bard, and that bard was an idiot. He had a less than average intelligence. We can go back to the character sheet for that. Just for reference. There's these stats, and I'll get into this during the character building part, I think, but you have these stats. So when you're seeing those things on that bar on the left side of my screen, there is big numbers. Those 6 big numbers are the modifiers. Those are not my stats. Those are the modifier that comes from my stats. Well, I'll discuss that in the character creation thing probably. But my stats there are 10, 18, 16, 12, 15, and 18. So what's going on there is 10 is average. Your average person. This is all. You don't think about it too much because you might lose your mind a little bit because it's like trying to figure out what exactly they mean by some of this stuff. But the vague guideline is that the average person has 10 strength, 10 dexterity, 10 constitution, 10 intelligence, 10 wisdom, and 10 charisma. You know, like up and down a little bit from there. So if you have below 10 of anything, you're considered to be below average at that thing, and if you have above 10 of something, you're considered to be above 10 of that. Our bard had below 10 intelligence, so he played it that way, and so he would just do the dumbest possible things in many situations, or just be like kind of oblivious or just blunt about certain things, and it was the mess that came of that was really fun. In one particular thing, we came into a new city and we had stolen goods that we'd actually gotten, I think, from killing people that were on their way out of said city, and he asks a random person on the street where he can find a fence, as in like to fence the stolen goods to make money off of them, and that person just calls the guards immediately. So we all back away from that because he made that mess for himself, so he gets arrested. None of us are involved, but I was able to help because a quirk of being a sorcerer is that they have meta magic. And the meta magic people, when you use meta magic, you have a bunch of different modifiers. You have your spells per day that all the spellcasters have. Then you have your meta magic points, which are a separate currency system that you can spend per day also to modify some of your spells that day. And since I was all thiefy and also didn't want people to capture me, 2 of the spells I had, one was a spell that would increase the range of spells, a meta magic modifier that would increase the range of spells, which means that you can cast spells further away than normal, which also had the effect that if it was a touch spell, meaning one that you can only cast by touching the object you're affecting, it would then become like a 15-foot spell instead of just a touch spell. So that gave me the ability to cast spells at range, even if they weren't supposed to be casted at range. Then I had a subtlety modifier, which meant that you could cast a spell without the verbal or somatic components of the spell. Because there's 3 components to a spell, potentially. One of them is the actual material cost, like does it require like a feather from an eagle or so on and so forth. Like are there reagents that you need to use to cast the spell? One of them is the verbal part of the spell, the part you say. That's pretty straightforward. And part of it's the somatic part of the spell, which is the gestures that are involved in casting the spell. If you've experienced any Harry Potter, you're already used to all 3 of these concepts, especially the verbal and somatic part, because that's the whole like Wingardium Leviosa, where they do the gesture and the words and all that stuff. So I was negating the verbal and somatic parts. I don't get free spells, although if you have a catalyst, you already kind of have free spells as far as the materials go. The materials don't come up a lot in most campaigns I've played, because usually you just have a wand of some sort that lets you get away with not having to use that. But my idea here is I wanted to be able to cast spells if I am bound. Because my character didn't want to be captured, and we started this entire campaign as being slaves. We had all been captured by Drow in the Underdark. I didn't want to be captured again, and that was a specific thing I was fixated on. So my whole thing is that if I was bound and gagged, I could still escape my binds with a spell, because me not being able to do gestures and words doesn't matter, because I can use my meta magic to get around that. Because there's a spell called Knock that just undoes binds and opens doors and unlocks things. Like whatever the thing is that's constricted and conformed and so on, it'll just stop being that way. I think I actually have it in here, because I think I think that's like a level 2 spell, so I don't think it's quite in the cards I have set aside right now. But it does make a lot of noise, so you do have to worry about that. Knock is a noisy spell. But I can still use it when I'm bound, or at least that was my interpretation, so that's why I took it. But in this case, our bard is being hauled off, and a side thing happens where this giant like beats down the gates of the city, and like there's a big hubbub happening. Like there's a little bit of a distraction happening. So in this moment, from 15 feet away, hidden away in the crowd, I cast Knock, and now our bard is no longer bound in his shackles, and he can improvise. Which is the best. That's the best I was willing to do. I wasn't about to incriminate myself or put my neck out on the line for this character, especially when he's doing this to himself. But I was definitely gonna like just do the smallest gesture of how to help, because I had the tools available to me, and that's what I did. Is I just undid his shackles and then moved on. But I love that. I love the specificity of that. And like this is a non-combat scenario too, but having such really specific tools prepared that I have for role-playing reasons, because it's specific to my character, but they come in handy in unexpected ways like this, because our bard was an idiot again, which they usually were. Just watching this happen was just great. And it's like part of the fun is that not only do I have the story now that I remember like a year later or more, but like nobody sat down that day thinking that's going to be what was going to happen that day. And that's part of the fun of D&D right there. I'm a little storied out, so let's give you a little preview here.
Not a whole lot to find. Sitting in the center is this nondescript obelisk with a plaque on it. What's supposed to happen is that the players go past the obelisk, see that there's some writing, they read it, and just keep walking. However, it says that if the players push the obelisk over, it would trigger a separate encounter. We're not supposed to be running it, the head GM explained. I mean, in order for the players to encounter that thing, they will first have to cast Identify on the obelisk, which, I mean, let's be perfectly honest, why would they? And then they would have to decide, oh, hey, let's break this rock and then try and knock it over. Let's be real, that's probably not gonna happen. And we all start laughing. It's a joke. Jokes are funny. I like jokes. Yeah, but what if they do, though?
Yeah. So that's called D&D Story, the Obelisk Encounter, on a channel called Puffin Forest. So if you want to see more of that, head over to his channel for more D&D stories. If you're just, jonesing for more of those. I'm not thinking of any more right now to tell, necessarily. But that's just an all-around good source for some of that stuff. In particular, it just continues to explore the weirdness of what can happen sometimes in this game.